Good evening and welcome to the second day of INQUISITIO, an interdisciplinary national webinar series organized by the Postgraduate and Research Department of English in association with IQAC, Maharaja's Government Autonomous College, Ernakulam, Kerala. I would like to thank all the participants who are present here right now. Before moving on to the session, let me share a few things with you. We have created a WhatsApp group, INQUISITIO webinar, exclusively for the smooth functioning of this webinar series. So those who haven't joined this WhatsApp group, please join it because we'll be sharing all types of links like joining YouTube joining links and feedback links only through this WhatsApp group titled INQUISITIO webinar. Okay, and the details regarding this joining of this WhatsApp group, you can collect it from the brochure. And yesterday, I got many complaints. It's not like complaints. I got many confusion. Some kinds of questions were there regarding the feedback link. Actually, we are giving you feedback link for each day. Each day, you have to fill up one feedback link, and there you don't have any provisions to write your name and official address because we just want to get an honest reply. Kind of we value your suggestions. That's why. So be very honest when you fill up those feedback links going to be provided every day. And regarding this issuing of the certificates, we will give you an overall feedback link in the last day of seminar, and that is December 7th. December 7th, one overall feedback link would be provided, and that too through this WhatsApp group. Okay, there you do have the provision to write your name, designation, and official address. So that feedback link would be used for issuing certificates, and other feedback links are used solely for our improvement. Okay, there you have provisions to write your suggestions also. And one more thing I want to tell you. You can write your questions there on the YouTube chat box. And we have a moderator today with us, Dr. Reem Shamsuddin from our own department, who is going to moderate today's webinar session. Okay. Okay. Then it's okay. We can begin our today's session. And I'm so happy to invite my dear friend, Dr. Swetha Anthony, to today's session, who is going to present a paper on the question of literal truth and meaning making in English studies. Swetha Anthony is a generalist whose fingers are dipped in multiple fields of literature and humanities. She has a PhD in English literature from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Her doctoral research work on the poetry of Kamala Das is broadly oriented towards post-colonial theory and literatures with special focus on the language question and the theories of cosmopolitanism. The politics of exile, as articulated by writers in the spectrum of new literatures in English, continues to fascinate her. She has forayed into a tantalizing area of food studies by co-editing with Elizabeth M. Schmidt the volume Beyond the Superficial, Making Sense of Food in a Globalized World, published by Oxford Interdisciplinary Press in the year 2016. Her papers on Kamala Das and postcolonial literatures have been published in various edited volumes and journals. She is currently exploring the notion of third culture or third space in contemporary literature and popular culture by foraying into film studies, sports studies, and environmental humanities. Her ongoing research is on the larger impact of Portuguese colonialism and the origin and evolution of the Latin Catholic community in Kerala, which has led to her engagement with the relationship between art, literature, and environment. She is currently exploring the concept of denial to understand the presence of geographical spaces in the literary, cultural, and performative traditions of the coastal belt of South India. She works as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Faculty of Arts, University of Delhi. So I welcome my dear friend, Dr. Swetha Anthony, to deliver her speech. Dr. Swetha.
Yeah. So, hi, thank you, Dr. Swetha, for that kind introduction. And it's indeed a pleasure to be here with you all because we are in a way reviving our Hyderabad connection on many accounts. So, Dr. Swetha is the convener of this program, and we were together at the refresher course. And Reem, who is moderating the session, was my batchmate at FU. So it's indeed a great pleasure to be with friends in a way. And before I move on to my paper as such, I would also like to place on record my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Rekha Karim, the HOD of the Department of English, Maharaja's College, the principal, Dr. Matthew George, and of course, Mr. Santosh of the IQAC cell for helping me with setting up, helping me with the technical aspects of the presentation. So, without much ado, I'll go into the talk today. So, for that, I'll be sharing my screen. So, I'll just do that. I have a PowerPoint. So, when Dr. Swetha asked me to take to deliver a lecture as part of this very interesting series, INQUISITIO, that the webinar series organized by the Department of English and Research Center of Maharaja's College. I was in a way a bit confused because if there is no title that is given to you, or no topic that is given to you, it's a bit it's quite a challenge to come up with a topic. Then I thought I'll do something general in a way, or something that will in a way cut across, uh, uh, cut across the barrier of teacher, student, etc. And the title of my talk is in a way quite ambitious: the question of literal truth and meaning making in English studies. And as most of us know, it's not really possible for us to kind of pin down these notions of literal truth or meaning making as we understand it within English studies. So I begin with a sort of an anticipatory veil, that what I'm trying to do today is perhaps open up a few areas of debates, open up a few questions perhaps based on my own experiences of being a part of the English department as a student, scholar, and also as a teacher. And I cannot assure you that I'll end my talk with definite answers, but of course, I hope to open up more questions at the end. So, let me begin from a very personal note. And I'm sure that this is something that most of us might have encountered at some point in our career as to this. And this is a question, why study literature? So this question was in a way posed or thrown at me many a times in my life when I decided to pursue a BA in English literature instead of a BTech or an MBBS. So, and throughout my student life, and even now, this is a question that comes up or pops up at certain moments, particularly if you're looking at the shift that has come in our lives. Even as English teachers, we are now online and we have to be tech savvy and all that. I've kind of pondered upon this question afresh from a different perspective altogether. But anyways, let me go back to one of those favorite answers that I found in my engagement with the question. And this is a part of an essay by Kenneth Womack titled Why Study Literature. I'll just read out this bit. The study of literature is intrinsically about the act of knowing. It is about knowing the world, a vast, uncharted universe of people and places, ideas, and emotions. But in helping to know the world, literature is mostly about coming to know yourself. It is about exploiting the recesses of your mind, the vicissitudes of your memories, the weight and pleasure of your deepest, most personal experiences. It is about getting closer and ever closer to understanding your own essential truths, and yet never quite arriving there. It is, in short, the most intimate and transformative journey that you can possibly take through the lens of your mind's eye. It is about you. So, on this very personal note, but this quote, in a way, also in a way points to some of the key terms that is part of the title of my talk. Truth, finding meaning, etc. And I'm sure that these aspects might have plagued you at many moments in your life as well. Let's now move on to certain aspects or certain terms that I've used in the title. And let's begin with the notion of literal, or the word literal. If you're looking at the title, the key elements there are literal, truth, and meaning making. And what I'm trying to do in this paper is to uh, engage with the idea of literature, or engage with the idea of literariness as a sort of a bridge, that bridge between literal truth and meaning making. And of course, the use of the image of bridge itself is beset with issues. So the question before us then is like, is this bridge dividing the two, or is it trying to connect the two? So the answer is not definite, but I hope that you are able to stumble upon some sort of a sense of closure regarding that. But let's begin with the word literal, and what does it mean? So as an adjective, literal means taking words in their usual or most basic sense without metaphor or exaggeration. And translate, like when it comes to translation, representing the exact words of the original text. So if we go into the nuances of these definitions, you will of course understand that there are definite problems associated with the term literal. And when you look at the word truth also, there is this notion of alluding to a statement of reality, uh, a sort of a genuinity that is attached to the depiction, an emphasis on facts. So if you're so there is a way in which literal and truth go hand in hand, but the whole idea of literal truth is problematized when you look at the notion of literariness. So that's what we are going to do next. So literariness as a term came to the forefront when formalist criticism took center stage somewhere around the second decade of the 20th century. And it has in a way impacted our understanding of literature and English studies in the 21st century to a large extent. And that has largely to do with the use of the term post-truth nowadays, where the idea is that there are multiple truths. There is no it's not possible for us to come up with a singular idea of truth, and there are only multiplicity, or pluriversality, etc. So, literariness is a term in the context of critical theory, refers to the distinction made by Roman Jacobson when he talked about how the use of language itself is a bit different when you are looking at literary texts and non-literary texts. And it's with this definition given by Jacobson that Russian formalism takes center stage within literature, within English studies. So, according to Jacobson, the object of literary science is not literature but literariness. That is what makes a given work a literary work. So what he did was, to focus on the formal aspects as opposed to the abstract entities pertaining to imagination. He looked at observable devices within literary texts, meter, rhyme, etc., and patterns of sound. So, in another sense, what he did was to foreground the idea of defamiliarization in the use of language, but by extension, we can use this term defamiliarization to look at the notion of arriving at a perception regarding the literary work that we are looking at. So in that sense, if the word literal is connected to the conventional idea of truth, the word literariness is in a way connected to the notion of post-truth, wherein there is a distinction that is made between a particular experience that is brought forth to a particular style of using language. Uh, so in that sense, the bridge between literal truth and meaning making within English studies, uh, I want to posit that it is in a way linked to the formalistic tradition within literary studies. Now, apart from the initiation of formalism, in this talk, I would focus on two other major movements. One is cultural criticism, the other is discourse analysis, and discourse analysis is in a way related to a larger extent to the formalistic debate that was initiated by Jacobson. And the impact or the initiation of cultural criticism, in a way, impacted our understanding of literature to a greater extent, largely because it problematized a sort of a conventional notion regarding the relationship between a text reader and the writer. All right, and as you all know, with the establishment of Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at University of Birmingham, England, by Richard Hoggart, Stuart Hall, uh, uh, etc., which happened in 1964, there was a sort of dismantling of the notion of doing literary studies or doing English studies or doing English literature. And in a way, the establishment of the center was not a sort of event that stood alone. It was part of a large-scale movement that was happening the realm of socio-political economic arenas in the 1960s and 70s. Large-scale upheavals. You are familiar with the movements, the student protests happening, the civil rights movements, the feminist movements, etc. So there was a sort of a questioning or a reinstation of various ideas or ideologies that were doing the round during the 1960s and 70s, and it is in a way related to those large-scale movements. And what was the major contribution of this center? What it did was to put forth or to critique the traditional or the conventional approaches to the analysis of texts, to the idea of interpretation and criticism. And what they did was to break down the idea of text, or the break down the idea of, say, text within literature departments. So it questioned the canon. Apart from that, it kind of bridged the gap between what came to be known as low culture and high culture. And what they foregrounded was a sort of an interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity, wherein our understanding of literature or art or cultural artifacts was dependent upon other aspects beyond the scope of the discipline of English studies, such as philosophy, sociology, psychology, etc. And what they largely foregrounded was the idea that culture was inscribed in the text, be it a work of Shakespeare, be it a graffiti that you find on the street, be it the game of cricket, or be it a game of football, be it a film, or be it a song. So all these, or they kind of opened up the idea of text, and they opened up the idea of interpretation and approaches of understanding the text, or contextualizing literature or literary analysis within cultural criticism. And how did the establishment of cultural criticism as a discipline impact English studies? So it not only redefined the definitions of culture, or the conventional definitions of culture, but what it did was to question the canon that we were so used to. And the counterculture movement or counterculture canon was not just something that they came up with, but apart from that, they tended to question the very idea of canon, and question a sort of a hegemony or hierarchy that was established within English studies, and how ironically centered in England, it kind of upset or dismantled the whole notion of defining literature or English literature or English studies as something that is unique to Britain. And they sought to be more descriptive and less evaluative, and they were, they tended to be more open towards engaging in an interdisciplinary approach to understand the notion of iterations of culture within any text. So that's cultural criticism. And now discourse analysis. Discourse analysis at the outset is the study of social life understood through the analysis of language in its widest sense. So you could analyze not just the use of language within a literary text or a non-literary text, but also you could analyze non-verbal interactions in the use of images, symbols, etc. And what discourse analysis did was to approach the use of language by bringing in a sort of an intersection between linguistic and social theory. So you're already familiar with the impact of Ferdinand de Saussure, a linguist, on uh, influence of Ferdinand de Saussure on creating this discourse of structuralism. So we'll be coming to structuralism also in a bit. But what discourse analysis did was to not only help us analyze features of a text such as narrative voice, grammar, wording, etc., but also in the way in which language was used in a particular way to treat events and social relations, and thereby construct particular versions of reality, social identities, and social relations. And again, as a discipline, it emerged in the 1970s. And as far as the impact of discourse analysis on English literature is concerned, it went on to question the canon, the idea of canon of literature, and they brought in other texts written in various dialects or from other parts of the world, which were written in English, and they also brought in texts from science, medicine, biology, zoology, anthropology, etc., in revisiting the English literary canon. So for instance, if you are looking at Victorian studies, for instance, you're not just engaging with the conventional canonical text, but you are also looking at the impact of Charles Darwin's on the species, on the evolution of species, etc. So there is a way in which even the initiation of discourse analysis into English studies foregrounded the notion of interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, etc. And uh, two key figures within the discourse analysis. One is Sarah Mills and her famous work Discourse, which was published in 1977. It was responsible for, in a way, evoking a sort of a binary, in a binary that is a problematic binary as far as English studies is concerned. So the discursive is a socially constructed reality which constructs both the real and the symbolic and the distinction between them. It assigns structure, there's a typo. It assigns structure to the real at the same time as it is a product and a moment, again, another type of real structure. So this whole relation between the real and the symbolic is problematized by language, and how that could be understood by looking at language as a socially constructed reality. So that's the key point from Sarah Moore's text Discourse. And the contemporary if you're looking at the evolution of discourse analysis as a method, we have Norman Fairclough's intervention called critical discourse analysis, which is pertinent to the current scenario. And he looks at he takes discourse analysis a bit further by titling it critical discourse analysis, and says that it is theory of the subject and of agency, in that it is concerned with the relationship between language, the subject, and social processes, viewing the subject as capable of influencing perceptions of the world and thus of changing things through his or her use of language. So let me kind of clarify these definitions, boring definitions, by taking up a very famous opening line from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which was published in 1830. So I'm sure that you know the line. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. All right. So if you're looking at this statement, we could use the tenets of critical discourse analysis to engage with how a particular use of language is able to create a world or construct a reality. All right, which is in a way situated within a particular ideology. For instance, if you look at the use of the words a single man and a wife, uh, uh, this whole statement will make sense only if you are uh, familiar with the rhetoric of Austen, situated within the Victorian sensibility. Because it's not possible for us to kind of replace a single man within the Victorian context with a gay man or a queer, for that matter. And the replacement of the word wife with friend, with a friend, or with the word friend, because in such use of or such words wouldn't in a way make sense within the Victorian scenario, right? So critical discourse analysis or discourse analysis as a method in a way helps us to bring in more interventions in understanding the relationship between literal truth and meaning making by helping us understand how language contributes to the reinstation of a particular ideology or a particular social construction, and how uh, the discourse as we know it is constituted by and constitutes the socio-cultural world, and also the focus on actual language use within a given context can be used as an object of research. And also the idea that language used in a particular way contributes to the description, to the reproduction of power relations in society, and to interpretative schema operating within a given society. And of course, discourse is historically situated, hence contingent and subject to change. Also, with discourse analysis, we can engage with a sort of a critical examination of language in order to promote change. So, this was a sort of a brief engagement with two major interventions within English studies, cultural criticism and discourse analysis. Now, before I move on to the next part of my lecture, which is problematizing the idea of text, the relationship between text, author, and reader, let me show you something. Uh, so I'm sure that you might have encountered this ad before. So I want you to look at this ad in terms of how it is trying to represent literal truth, or how it problematizes literal truth. Because if you're looking at this ad, there are many questions that it brings to the forefront. First of all, our situatedness as Indians, because the first thing that comes to my mind would be, as a Keralite, would be the lack of, or the lack of a Keralite in the ad, because of course that is there. But in the context of this present discussion, I want you to think about how this can be used as a text, given the formulations of cultural criticism, and also look at the way in which language has been used uh, used within the ad. and also the choice of certain cultural artifacts in formulating the notion of an India. And of course, in that there is a sort of a presence of a certain ideology at work. And right at the outset, we have this young woman in a way questioning this whole idea of map. How do you connect to the notion of a map? So, as English studies students or teachers or scholars in India, the first thing that comes to our mind would be post-colonial criticism and how the idea of a map itself is problematic. And immediately we connect to Benedict Anderson's notion of a nation as an imagined community, etc. So it opens up a lot of debates. It tries to redefine our experientiality. And as a part of the discussions that come up, I would want you to think about how this text is inviting you to uh, uh, find a meaning, or how far does the gap between literal truth and meaning making come into play when you try to connect yourself to the idea of India that is projected through this ad. Because clearly uh, the lack of Kerala in the ad is problematic as far as our identities are concerned. But another interesting fact, where we find a sort of uh, uh, opportunity for discourse analysis or a cultural critical approach, would be how at the end there is a disclaimer. This map is used for creative representation only and is not intended to be used for reference purposes. All right. So I'm not kind of um, forcing interpretations on more interpretations on the ad at this moment, but I want you to kind of look at some of the problems that is there within the ad, and how it upsets the notion of corporeality and mapping, or the idea of how it's impossible uh, uh, to connect to the experiential reality of belonging to a nation that is India. And this caption itself, India is in our hearts. So which India is in our hearts? Again, I hope you are able to come up with ways of understanding, ways of seeing the problem within looking at India from this perspective of a literal truth, and how there is a need for us to kind of bring in other devices to understand this. So on that juncture, where we are looking at the notion of interpretations and meaning making, let's move on to the notion of a text. All right. And uh, so what I've given here is the definition of a text from one of the famous essays in of the 20th century, that is Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author, which is nothing short of a revolution when it was published, because what Barthes did was to upset a sort of a conventional idea of the relationship between author, reader, and text, wherein he gave a sort of a prominence to the text, as opposed to the traditional or the conventional practice within literary criticism uh, uh, to posit a sort of an authority to the author figure. All right. And let me read out this section from Roland Barthes' essay, The Death of the Author. A text is made up of multiple writings drawn from many cultures and entering into mutual relations of dialogue, parody, contestation. But there is one place where this multiplicity is focused, and that place is the reader, not, as was hitherto said, the author. The reader is the space on which all the quotations that make up a writing are inscribed without any of them being lost. A text's unity lies not in its origin but in its destination. Yet this destination cannot any longer be personal. The reader is without history, biography, psychology. He is simply that someone who holds together in a single field all the traces by which the written text is constituted. So, as you all know, this essay of Barth in a way initiated, alongside many other critical intervention, the debates of structuralism within English studies. And this whole notion of uh, uh, a text as a site of utterances or iterations came to be viewed as a revolutionary means of understanding literariness. But there was a problem inherent in Barth's postulations because yes, he did something. He did shatter the either to conventional or classical notion of criticism as something that sides with the authority of the author. Because if you look at traditional criticism or conventional criticism, classical criticism, what we did was to connect whatever is written in the text to the biography of the author. So we were trying to find the author's voice in the text. But with Barth's intervention, what was posited was this notion that it is not the author that should be the focus, or the meaning making as a process should be dependent upon the reader and not on the author. All right, because once the text is written, the author is dead. And it is the text that has to bring about a sort of a intervention, not the author. So, in that sense, Barth's initiation into English studies or into the discipline of English studies brings in a shift from conventional classical criticism, literary criticism, to what we now call as critical theoretical intervention. Uh, but as far as Barth's postulation is concerned, he posited the reader as an utopian figure, a reader as a position in relation to the text, and how it is the reader's interpretations that make up the text, or the traces within the text. And in another sense, Barth's reader is no more than the destination of the multiple writings and intertextual relations that make up the text itself. So this is a quote from Catherine Belsey's essay, Textual Analysis as a Research Method. That is, his reader is no more than the destination of the multiple writings and intertextual relations that make up the text itself. Now, what is the problem with Barth's formulation? The problem with Barth's formulation is that he did question the sort of a hegemony that was forced on to the author as the center of meaning. He did question that. He did shift the understanding, he did shift the understanding of the relationship between the text, author, and reader. He did foreground the importance of text as a site of meaning and not the author. But what he failed to do was to foreground this idea that there can be multiple readings as well. As in, he was so focused on shifting the attention from author to text and the reader, he forgot that the process of meaning making itself could be multiple, or he kind of ignored the fact that there could be differences between readings done by each reader, and also the problematic of this utopian figure of the reader without any sense of history, biography, or psychology existing, because we all of us bring our situatedness as readers to the interpretation process. So that's where Foucault came in. uh, Michel Foucault's What is an Author, in a way, tried to address some of the problems that was there within Barth's formulation. And what Foucault did was to talk about this notion of the institution of author criticism, etc., as the principle of thrift in the proliferation of meaning. All right, as in something is lost or something is stolen by the institution in this process of meaning making. And because of the intervention of that essay by Foucault, that is What is an Author, we understand now what can be postulated as the post-structuralist reader. So the shift from structuralism to post-structuralism is evident if you engage with these two essays. So who is this post-structuralist reader as posited by Foucault? So the post-structuralist reader remains the destination of the text, but is at the same time differentially located in relation to it. If we maintain the sense of a dialogue between what we bring and what we find, the reading that results is likely to make or come to make sense to other people, to be admissible at least in the end as interpretation and not free association. So if you're looking at that ad also, it's not possible for us to kind of come up with a sort of a singular idea of India is in our hearts, because for each one of us it's different. So so what then, or how then can we think about this notion of meaning making? So in order to understand that a bit further, I would want you to also look at this notion of écriture, or the French word for writing. But within English studies, the nuances of that term has been attached to at least four different strains of critical theoretical thoughts. So the first one was again refers to Barth, his work Writing Degree Zero, which came out in 1953. It looked at, or it tried to redefine this notion of writing as such, and it attacked the notion of the illusion of a blank or neutral writing on the grounds that all writing has some style or discourse that shades our view of the world. So in that sense, the possibility of how the situatedness of each one of us would go into not just the meaning making process, but also into this process of what he calls écriture, or écriture, or writing as a process that is decentered to begin with. And later on in Writers and Authors, he brings in writing as an intransitive activity, and he introduces the notions of écrivain, uh, problematizing again the role of the author or the writer as the autonomous figure. Now we have Jacques Derrida using or redefining writing or écriture as difference, as something that is constantly postponed, or how even writing does not, in that sense, bring to the fore a certainty that we used to associate with speech in a way. And of course, within gender studies, we have Sisu bringing in this notion of a language that is, or a language, a woman's language, a sort of a semiotics of language that is beyond the logic of, beyond patriarchal logic, or beyond the logic of the binaries that define our understanding of truth or reality. Uh, Now, in that context, or in a context where it's impossible for us to really pin down what is the relationship between reader, text, and author, when all these activities, all these basic activities like writing itself is problematized, when this very notion of language itself is problematized. So how do we then make sense of meaning making, or how do we kind of attain the notion of a meaning? Uh, so the best way to look at it would be to engage with the notion of a dialogue that is going on within the text. All right, and as scholars, as researchers, as teachers, as students of literature, we have to posit the notion that we are not readers in a way, but we are in a way trying to make sense of the complicated process, or the processes of interpretation that works out on multiple levels. So what are the possible levels that we can be aware of? The first one would be the dialogue that is there within the text itself. The next level would be the dialogue between the reader and the text, that is, the Barthian reader, that ideal reader. All right, so there is a possibility of a dialogue between the reader and the text, and as scholars we have to be aware of these two dialogues. So there is a dialogue that is already there within the text, and then with the intervention of Barth, we are made aware of the possibility of how the text itself is a destination, dependent not upon the author but on the reader. So how does the situatedness of the reader go into the meaning making process in a particular milieu? And as suppose if you're looking at Pride and Prejudice, how that statement was received during the Victorian era would be drastically different from how it is received during the 21st century. But as scholars of English studies, as students, teachers of English studies, we have to be aware of the dialogue that happens between Victorian England and our 21st century reality. So in that sense, the dialogue is on multiple levels. So the dialogue that is already there within the text, the dialogue between the reader and the text, the reader, imagine the reader to be a Victorian reader or a reader who belong to the Victorian era, and how we connect, how we make the connection as scholars within of 21st century to the Victorian era and the dialogues that's there in the text. So what ultimately happens, as is posited through the discourses of structuralism and post-structuralism, is how we find a position in relation to these dialogues. As in, right now, the process of meaning making is dependent upon the notion of finding or discovering the not discovering the author, but discovering the self and discovering a position in relation to the various sociological interventions that is found in that text. And in that sense, what we are, when we are undertaking this process of meaning making, what we are doing is not paraphrasing, we are not engaging with the reproduction of the possible idea that is articulated by the author, quote unquote. It cannot be a pure subjectivism or a vague subjectivism. It cannot be free association also. So interpretation here depends upon this notion of the negation of a pure reading, and interpretation or meaning making is a process that leads to the discovery of a particular position in relation to all these dialogues. And most often than not, this identification of a position ultimately is dependent upon our own self, or it is our own situatedness that would kind of bring something new to this meaning making process or to this act of interpretation. So if you go back to that ad itself, the meaning that we'll each one of us bring to that ad would be dependent upon each one of our situatedness. So even though I am from Kerala, my experiences of working in Delhi would contribute immensely to the interpretation that I would bring to that ad. As scholars of English studies in India, where post-colonial studies takes center stage, that situatedness of each one of us within the discourse of post-colonialism will bring in or will add to the sort of a position that we try to find in the meaning of that ad. So what is to be understood is that all readings cannot be equal. All readings cannot be equal, and there is the only closure that we can attain in terms of finding a meaning is that there are multiple meanings to a text. All right, and the best way to kind of end this lecture would be to go to Catherine Belsey's essay "Textual Analysis is a Research Method," wherein she problematizes the structuralist and post-structuralist intervention into the notion of text, and she gives us some ideas of how to arrive on a possible meaning in the era of post-truth. And she says in the essay, meaning then subsists in the relations between people inscribed in signifiers, sounds, or images. It has its own materiality. Meaning intervenes in the world, defining our understanding of values, requiring us to obey rules, and indeed calling us to arms. Meaning is not anchored in anything outside signification itself, and the signifying process supplants it. All we can be sure of, in other words, is a signifier, and this cannot be tied to any unique reading to end all readings. On the contrary, meanings are always ultimately undesirable. And to some extent, these meanings are dependent upon how we define ourselves, or how we bring our own situatedness to the understanding of the text at hand. And I would like to kind of conclude again by referring to one of those practical interventions made by Catherine Belsey. Because in a way, all of us are engaged in the act of doing research when we are doing English studies. And how do we do research, or how do we take forward our interests within English studies to the next level in this era of post-truth, where it's not possible for us to be in any sense of closure? So the answer that she gives is this: research is expected to make a contribution to knowledge. It uncovers something new. So that's what research is all about. So, but what's interesting is how she looks at research, or the idea of original, or the use idea of the use of the word original within research, to this notion of independence. All right, wherein it is the researcher situatedness that would contribute to the notion of originality to research, wherein the capacity of the researcher to think about this particular topic in an independent manner. And original, it's impossible to be original in this post-truth era, but what can be done is to look at the series of ideas that have been brought that has been explored within a particular field. And it is possible for us to assemble those set of ideas in a particular manner, which is unique because it's largely dependent upon our own situatedness, our own repertoire of knowledge that we have, our own readings, our own experiences, etc. And she says research does not have to shift the paradigm. The contribution can be quite small, a piece of the jigsaw, but research is required to make a difference to the standard account of a topic, whatever that topic might be. So let me end this presentation on that note. And I would leave this reference to a very popular narrative that is Sherlock Holmes. So the idea that we are all, in a way, taking part in a game, and the game, Mrs. Hudson, is on. So that is the best way to engage with the relationship between literal truth and meaning making, looking at it as a game. Thank you.
Reem, you are not audible. Reem, you're not audible.
Hello. Hello, ma'am.
Yes, you are audible, Reem. Continue.
Okay. So I was saying, thank you so much, Dr. Swetha Anthony, for such an elaborate talk tracing the literal truth, history of literal truth, and how it has, it has undergone the various process in meaning making. It was the talk was very much. Uh, very much a part of learning process, and it contributed a lot to, especially to our students who are dealing with cultural studies and literature, and dealing with literature majorly as an interdisciplinary study. So it was such a such a wonderful talk, and thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your valid time for this. And now I would like to open the floor for more discussions, and I want the questions to come up if there's any.
Thank you.
Questions? Do we have questions in the chat box? YouTube comment box? Malavika, Parvati?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
Are you all there?
Okay. Here is a question that. Okay, ma'am. Swetha, ma'am, are you there? Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes, Parvati.
Okay, ma'am. Amina Siraj has asked
you're
one
audible.
question that can meanings deciphered and derived be called truth, or rather an interpretation of culture? I hope it's clear, ma'am.
Yeah, it's clear. Thanks, Amina, for that interesting question. I wouldn't call meaning making an attempt at arriving at truth, because the notion of a singular notion, the idea of a singular notion of truth doesn't exist. So yes, the other alternative is better. The meaning making as a way of understanding the intervention of culture onto a text. That would be better. I hope.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. There is next question by Irfan Mahdi, that is there any relation between word and its meaning as far as linguistic theory of Saussure is concerned? If yes, then what about matter of social construct of language and deconstruction?
Sorry, I didn't get the name of the
Irfan, ma'am.
Irfan. Okay. Irfan, if you're looking at Saussurean linguistics, or the theories posited by Saussure as part of his introduction to general linguistics, there is no relationship between word and meaning, because as posited by Saussure, every meaning is arbitrary, or we have to kind of understand, or we arrive at a possible meaning through a process of deferring it, as in through a process of relativism, as in you understand hut by comparing it with other words like mansion or palace. So that notion, as posited by Saussure, is what has led to these discussions put forth by Barthes and Foucault to some extent, wherein there is no center to language in that sense. So the whole idea of meaning making itself is upset or dismantled because of this lack of center as far as language is concerned, or the arbitrariness of language. So yeah, meaning is forever postponed, or the signified is transcendental, as posited by Saussure. So it's forever deferred. We never arrive at a meaning. We arrive at a sort of a relative notion of what we consider as meaning. That's why we all often say that please do not misunderstand me, with like even when we are trying to make someone understand something by using the same language, we use the same language and tell them that please don't misunderstand me. I didn't mean it that way. So yes, it's not possible for us to kind of arrive at that essential meaning by using language.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And the next question is by Sharanya Narayanan, and she says meaning making is mostly associated to live personal experiences. English life is not comprehensible to an Indian reader. How do you comment?
Sharanya, again, thank you for the question. I think this point was raised by Meenakshi Mukherjee at some point in our career, where we said that that's one of the problems within English departments in India, because if we have to think of summer, we cannot think of summer in India. We often have this romanticized view of summer spent in England, the English summer. But yes, there is a point in, and that is why, interventions by cultural criticism, where they kind of question or dismantle the canon, and also the gap between high culture and low culture comes in, and makes it possible for us today to look at how summer is represented by Kamala Das in one of her poems, and able to talk about it rather than just looking at summer that is represented in some of the works from Britain. So I would say that it's because of the intervention of cultural criticism and related theoretical intervention that today it's possible for us to engage with texts from various parts of the world, and even within English studies in translation, etc.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. There is another question also from Karuna Babu, and the question is, can you describe the influence of subjectivity in meaning making?
Influence of subjectivity, right?
Yes, ma'am. In
Yes.
meaning making.
So when I was talking about, or when I was concluding my lecture today, I referred to this to many words, such as free association, paraphrasing, vague subjectivism, etc. So that's something that kind of problematizes, the relationship between objectivity and subjectivity, that is very much part of academic research today. So when we are doing research within, or when we are undertaking research to some extent, there is always this compulsion on us to be objective. But when we are looking at research within English studies, this notion of being objective is problematic, because to begin with, literature itself is in a way, something that tries to move away from any objective understanding of reality to begin with. If you look at what Jacobsen was talking about, there is the literariness, or a particular way of using language, is what kind of differentiates literature from other disciplines. So in a sense, literature, or understanding literature, has to do more with a sort of a subjective intervention. But as scholars, we have to be careful about this notion of bringing in overt subjectivism in analyzing a text, right? So we have to kind of balance the act by kind of saying, see, it's so when we analyze the text, or when we read a text, some things are given. So if our analysis is just an overview of what is given, that would be mere paraphrasing or a mere reproduction of what the author might have said. So that's one end of the spectrum. And on the other hand, we have pure subjectivism, as in you cannot bring in a sort of a far-fetched reading of a text just based on your experiences. So you have to kind of bring in a sort of a balance between the two. So you cannot be overtly subjective, and you cannot just be objective just by going by what is given in the text. So a balance has to be brought in. And how can the balance be brought in? Perhaps by kind of so look at the example that I gave you. Understanding Jane Austen today, it needs a sort of a balancing out of understanding of Victorian sensibility as far as the institution of marriage is concerned, the idea of gender is concerned, etc. So if you are looking at the use of the single man within that statement that we looked at, in today's reality, the single man can mean anything. All right. So, but if you have to understand what Jane Austen meant, we need to understand what the use of the word single man meant within the Victorian sensibility. But we also need to bring in our own understanding of the use of the word single man within the advanced interventions within gender studies, also when we are analyzing Jane Austen. So it cannot be a sort of a intensive subjective reading, but to some extent your subjective understanding of the text has to be validated by your understanding of the discourses of gender, the discourses of Victorian studies, and also the contemporary engagement with the notion of marriage, etc. I hope that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Can I make a comment with regarding that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I guess this is a kind of like, when literature becomes a cultural discourse, it enters into like, as we say, like, syntagmatic, paradigmatic relationships, like, kind of trying to understand things in terms of syntagmatic relation, like, as you said, like a man should be understood in terms of could be understood in terms of gender studies, like, or a man could be understood in terms of like, for example, like, a Muslim, a chauvinist.
All right,
So
yeah.
all these elements could be common, like, a man can have a lot of these many kind of identities apart from the Victorian understanding of a man. So this is kind of like, when it becomes a cultural discourse, it enters into another kind of relations. So this is like, in the initial part of like, literature becomes a cultural discourse kind of postulations, people like kind of talk about all these kinds, or all these sort of differences, like when it engages into another kind of arguments or relationships.
Yes, of course. So we have to be aware of all those various notions at work, when we are reading any text, right? That's what you meant, right?
Yeah.
So between the literal truth and meaning, like how do we look at literature? Do we look at it as a bridge that connects the two realities, or any other question?
No, ma'am, that was the last question. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Swetha, for coming up with wonderful responses for our students. And thank you so much for your valuable time. Over to you, Sabita ma'am.
Thank you, Reem.
Thank you, Reem. Thank you, my dear students, and thank you, my dear Swetha. Next, I would like to invite Grishma Rajan from Second MA English for vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I am very honored to have the opportunity to propose of the vote of thanks of this auspicious evening, and on behalf of the Department of English, Maharaja's College. I want to thank our resource person, Dr. Swetha, Department of English, University of Delhi, for enlightening us with the valuable words. Thank you, ma'am. I would further extend my hearty thanks to Dr. Matthew George, the Honorable Principal of Maharaja's College, for making this event happen. Thank you, sir. And I take this opportunity to specially express my deep regards to IQAC department of our college for coordinating this beautiful function. I would especially thank Dr. Rekha Karim, head of the department, Maharaja's College, for always encouraging us and providing opportunities to organize such events. Thank you, ma'am. My deepest sense of appreciation to Dr. Sabidayas Babu, the coordinator without whom the program wouldn't have been such most successful. Thank you, ma'am, for our unfolding support. I heartily convey my gratitude to the loving teachers and students of our Department of English for being the pillars of support. We have always been like a family. A big thanks to all the participants who chose to live with us and attended the webinar with the great enthusiasm and made it a successful event. Once again, I thank you all for being with us. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Grishma.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grishma. Thank you. So with this, today's session has come to an end. Tomorrow we'll meet at 7 p.m. And I'll send you the links, details, and everything. I have already sent feedback link of today's session in the WhatsApp in INQUISITIO webinar, and tomorrow we'll meet at 7 p.m. Thank you.